They told you the Titanic sank because it hit an iceberg. And that part is true. But the full story, the one buried in sealed archives, survivor testimonies, and 100-year-old documents, is far darker than anything the movies showed you. Because the Titanic didn't just sink due to bad luck. It sank because of decisions, secrets, and a chain of events so disturbing that some historians believe the disaster was not entirely an accident. Tonight, we go beyond the shipwreck. Tonight, we go into the untold story of the Titanic. The RMS Titanic was the crown jewel of the White Star Line, built at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland. She was 882 feet long, weighed 46,000 tons, and cost $7.5 million to build, roughly $220 million in today's money. Everything about her was designed to signal power, wealth, and the unstoppable march of modern civilization. But weeks before she ever left port, something went terribly wrong. Deep inside the ship, hidden below the waterline in Boiler Room 6, a coal fire had ignited. Not a small flame. A raging, smoldering inferno buried inside a 30-foot tall coal bunker, burning so intensely that workers couldn't extinguish it. This fire started at least 10 days before the Titanic set sail on April 10, 1912. And investigators decades later would calculate that the fire burned at over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, weakening the steel hull plating on the very section of the ship that would later be struck by the iceberg. Researcher Senan Malani spent 30 years studying this fire. He identified black marks on the ship's hull in original photographs taken just days before departure, marks that lined up precisely with the impact zone. The fire was known to White Star Line executives. It was known to the captain. It was known to the engineers. And yet, they sailed anyway. Because canceling the maiden voyage of the most famous ship in the world would have cost them millions, damaged the company's reputation, and drawn exactly the kind of attention they were desperate to avoid. So they sailed, with the hull already compromised by fire, into the North Atlantic, at nearly full speed. But that's only the first secret. Because among the most shocking pieces of the Titanic story involves not the ship itself, but the people who were supposed to be on it. When the Titanic departed from Southampton on April 10, 1912, it was supposed to carry some of the most powerful men in America. John Pierpont Morgan, better known as J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in the world, had a private suite reserved on the Titanic. He canceled at the last minute, citing health concerns. So did Henry Clay Frick, the steel and railroad magnate. So did Milton Hershey, the chocolate empire founder, who had even paid a deposit. So did railroad magnate and industrialist George W. Vanderbilt. In total, a remarkable number of America's wealthiest and most connected figures canceled their trips at the last minute. Now, coincidence happens. People cancel trips. But some researchers have pointed out something more troubling. Many of the men who did board the Titanic and did not survive were among the most vocal opponents of a central banking system in America, which J.P. Morgan had championed and which would become the Federal Reserve in 1913. Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, John Jacob Astor IV. All three died in the sinking. All three had, in various ways, expressed opposition to the financial systems Morgan was building. This theory has never been proven. And it deserves skepticism. But it exists. And it raises a question that has never been fully answered: why did so many extraordinarily powerful men, all from the same social circles, all with confirmed bookings, suddenly decide not to board the same ship? Now let's talk about the ship itself, because there is a theory, supported by actual evidence, that the vessel that sank on April 14, 1912, was not the Titanic at all. In 1911, just months before the Titanic's maiden voyage, its near-identical sister ship, the Olympic, was involved in a major collision with a British warship, the HMS Hawke. The damage was severe, and the insurance claim was denied. The collision was ruled to be the Olympic's fault. This left the White Star Line in a devastating financial position. They had a crippled ship they couldn't insure, enormous repair bills, and a company teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Some researchers, most notably Robin Gardner, in his book Titanic, The Ship That Never Sank, have proposed that White Star Line secretly swapped the two ships. That the heavily damaged Olympic was repaired, repainted, and relabeled as the Titanic. And that the plan was to sail the Titanic into a controlled disaster, collect the insurance money, and save the company. The problem, if the theory is true, is that the disaster was never supposed to kill 1,500 people. The plan, allegedly, was for a nearby rescue ship to collect everyone aboard before the vessel went down. But the rescue never came. Because the ship positioned nearby, a vessel called the SS Californian, stopped and went dark. This brings us to what many historians consider the most damning secret of the entire disaster. On the night of April 14, 1912, as the Titanic was sending distress signals and firing emergency flares into the black sky, another ship sat less than 20 miles away. The SS Californian. The Californian had stopped for the night because its captain, Stanley Lord, had decided the ice was too dangerous to continue. And from the Californian's deck, officers reported seeing a large ship in the distance. They saw rockets being fired. They watched for nearly 2 hours. They did not respond. The Californian's radio operator had already gone to bed that night, after the Titanic's radio operator had reportedly told him to shut up when the Californian tried to warn of ice conditions. By the time the Carpathia arrived to rescue survivors, the Titanic had been gone for over an hour. Official inquiries on both sides of the Atlantic concluded that the Californian could have reached the Titanic in time. Captain Lord was publicly blamed. He denied it until his death. And the full truth of why the Californian sat motionless while 1,500 people drowned in 28-degree water has never been resolved to everyone's satisfaction. There is one more secret, one that feels almost too small to matter until you understand what it cost. The lookouts on the Titanic that night, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, were stationed in the crow's nest to watch for obstacles in the darkness. They had no binoculars. The binoculars had been locked in a cabinet. And no one had the key. The key had belonged to an officer named David Blair, who was removed from the crew roster at the last minute due to a staffing change. Blair left the ship before departure and forgot to hand over the key. This meant that on the darkest, most critical night of the Titanic's voyage, the men responsible for seeing danger in time to avoid it were staring into blackness with nothing but their naked eyes. Frederick Fleet later testified that with binoculars, he believed they would have seen the iceberg in time. In time to turn. In time to live. One forgotten key. One replaced officer. One chain of small, entirely preventable decisions. And 1,517 people never came home. The story you were taught is that the Titanic sank because it hit an iceberg in the North Atlantic. But now you know the rest. A fire burning inside the hull before it ever left port. A list of the world's most powerful men who all, mysteriously, decided not to board. A theory, supported by physical evidence and documented financial desperation, that the ship was swapped for insurance fraud. A rescue ship that sat miles away and did nothing while people died in freezing water. And a single missing key that may have sealed the fate of 1,500 souls. The Titanic was not just a shipwreck. It was a convergence of arrogance, greed, secrecy, and failure at every level of human decision-making. And after more than 100 years, the ocean still holds its secrets. Some of them, we may never recover. Subscribe to Lost Chronicle, and every week we will take you deeper into the cases that history could not explain.